Kanata ara, oops. He uri tēnei no Kanata ara no Ontario hoki, ko Hurono te roto. I'm from the Great Lakes region of Ontario. Ko Sabo te awa, ko Ojibwe te iwi takitake. Ojibwe are the local people from the place where I'm from. O Ngāti Pākehā tōku waka ki Kanata, I tipo ana au ki Kanata, heoi ke Aotearoa au e noho ana. A mihi hoki, me rā te mihi ki ngā mana whenua o te rohi nei, a mihi hoki ki ngā tohu o te rohe o Kauamutu ara wahi e noho ana au. Reira, tēnei te mihi koutou. So lovely to share this time with you today. Okay, so food waste. This is the first in the series of our wānanga that make up what we call Compost 101. It's a series of wānanga designed to cover the basics of compost, really just to get people going. And we found that as we were delivering our wānanga and helping people set up different kinds of composts, the same questions were coming up again and again. So Compost 101, like the basics of composting, building our foundational understanding of what it is, what makes up Te Mahi Wairākau, what are we doing when we're making compost, what it's all about and what it's for. So this is the first wānanga in the series of 3 of Te Mahi Wairākau, of Compost 101, and this is all about food waste in compost versus food waste in landfill. So it examines how, what happens to our food when we put it into rubbish versus what happens to food when we put it into compost. Just that direct comparison. It's examining how both of these systems work, and of course, which one makes more sense. Hopefully you already know the answer to that question, but this will help explain it. And sometimes we just need to know, well, that's why. Well, that's why we're doing this. And this is the reason. So this is the reason for this wānanga today, to look bit of that. Okay, so I'm going to share my, here we go. And okay, so you should be looking at Te Mahi Wairākau, Compost 101, Whai Tikanga o Te Mahi Wairākau. So we're finding out what happens to when we put food in rubbish versus when we put food in landfill, looking at these two systems, but also the tangible outcomes that they create, like what products are, what comes of putting our food in these two different places, landfill or compost, but also the two very different impacts that these systems have on our health, on our taiao, on our atua, on our capability to grow food, and our health in general. It's a very simple question, but one with hugely different outcomes. You're standing there, you've got that 5-second choice, you're holding the food in your hand, and do you put it in the landfill bin or do you put it in the food waste bin? And that one decision, as we're going to see, has monumentally different outcomes. So first up, there is a false belief, a myth, a false belief about what happens to food waste in landfill. So we're backing up a step, because the first point is people often ask, why is it even a problem? So this is question number 1, and I'm wanting to hear an answer. So this is your first opportunity to unmute, and somebody tell me, you've all heard it. What is it that people think happens? They think, oh, don't worry about food in rubbish. Don't worry about it. It's fine, because what? There's a myth. There's a false belief that they think.
They think it's good.
Why?
It decomposes.
Oh, they decomposes. It's that myth of landfill and rubbish that it always goes away. It magically goes away. It's gone. Yeah, there's a myth about food waste that it will disappear when we put it in landfill. It's natural. It doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly that. So it's sometimes believed that food waste will break down in compost, in landfill, like it does in compost, which makes sense because people think of landfill being a big hole in the ground. They think, oh, well, it's natural, food just disappears. However, it isn't true. Look at that last line. Organic waste cannot break down in a landfill system because landfills, here's the key point, are designed for storage, not decomposition. Landfills are designed for storage. They're a storage facility of our waste. They are not something that makes things go away. That's the first thing to remember. Oh, now I'm seeing a hand pop up there. Now, I didn't say in the tikanga there before. So questions, what we're going to do is, I'm loving questions, and there's definitely a time dedicated to having patai through this. If you have it, pop it into the chat, and I've got my colleague who is collecting the questions, and she's dropping them into a spot that I can see for later on, and I'll certainly address those questions. So feel free to do that in the meantime. Okay. So before we even talk about landfills and how they work, then let's back up a step and just remember how composts work, meaning if we're putting our food waste into compost, what is going on? What enables that to change that? Before we even get to that question, I want to ask another question before that. We talk about compost, everyone's heard of compost. Compost is good for the garden, but if I'm working with a brand new ropu, if I've come into a kura or a marae or a community organization that we work with, and I say, let's make compost, I can't even assume that they know what compost is. What is compost? There's my next question. Somebody unmute. What is compost? When I'm standing here holding this stuff and I'm saying, look, here's compost, what is it? There's one word I'm looking for.
Soil.
Soil. Good. Whoever said that, thank you very much. Soil. We're making new soil. So what do we need to have to change our food waste? What needs to happen to change our food waste to turn it into new soil? So we're going to work these out one by one, and you can see my picture of Te Pū Wairākau. We've got my compost pile there. The food doesn't just magically turn into new soil. This is where we have to engage with our atuatanga, and our atua are involved in this. Our whanaunga are involved in this. The living natural world is involved in this process. We're going to go through one by one and find out what it takes to change food waste into new soil. So I'm going to give you a few clues, and listen to these clues, and I'm looking for another answer again. So the first one is this. Okay, so forget about compost for just a second. Here's a different kind of a question. If you had food for dinner last night and you didn't finish your dinner, and you want your food to stay the same, you want to eat it tomorrow night, you don't want it to change, where do you put your food? Where does it go in your kitchen? Where do you put it? Somebody pop out the answer for me. Where does food go so it stays the same?
In the fridge.
Thank you. In the fridge. Why do you put it in the fridge? It's an obvious question, but why does it go in the fridge? Describe inside the fridge.
Colder, so the
Cold.
bacteria don't really do much.
Perfect. Excellent answer. Exactly. However, in the compost, we don't want the food to stay the same. We want the food to change. We want it to change quickly. So what's the first thing, first condition, first aspect that needs to happen to change our food waste? Not the fridge, not the cold, but
Warmth.
thank you, heat. We need heat. We need heat from the sun. And the more heat we have, the quicker and more successful the process. Ngā hihi o pamanuitara. So we've got pamanuitara involved in the story now. Second thing that we need to help change our food waste into new soil is, well, it's something that's it's been doing a lot of it at the moment. I'm looking at it at the window right now. It makes things go mushy. It makes them go soggy, makes them fall apart. What's the second thing we need to make compost?
Whai.
Ai, kapai, ngā roimata o Ranginui. We need the tears of Ranginui. We need water. We need that cycle that comes through, and water fulfills so many jobs in breaking down our food waste. compost. Third one, therefore, here's another hint. So you come home, you have a snack, you open up the packet, you open up the tin, you open up the bread bag, you open up the crackers, you have your snack, you don't put the lid back on, you don't click, 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 you don't shut it back up. What's changing the food? Something's made it go stale, it's made it go soft, it's making
Oxygen.
oxygen, kapai.
Nice.
So if you put things in an airtight container, they don't change. So if your compost doesn't have oxygen, it's like you're drying it to preserve it. You don't want it to change. It needs that air, it needs that moisture going through it. So te hau o tawherematia. So we need the breath, the winds of tawherematia. We need oxygen going through, and we're going to look a little bit more at that. So essential for composting is oxygen. As microorganisms oxidize, carbon for energy, the oxygen is used up. So without sufficient oxygen, the process becomes anaerobic, and that's when you have those undesirable smells, like that rotten egg smell in the compost. And if you hear of people turning compost, talking about turning it, one is to get that moisture evenly distributed through it, but the other is to get the oxygen through it, because it impacts on how the process works. So the fourth thing, and these are the ones who need the oxygen, this is the whole community of life, seen and unseen, in the soil that we mostly never see, but they are the key ingredients to changing and to processing everything. Who am I thinking of? What is in the soil that is alive, that is living, that is enabling this process? A few different answers here. What would one be? Who's doing the work?
Bacteria.
Bacteria, microorganisms, and who are what were they?
Worms.
Worms, noke, exactly. So we need the millions and millions and billions of living organisms in the soil that help make this process. So this is a quick little checklist just on your compost right there, because some people put their compost around the back, in the back alley, behind the shed, under the tree, in the shade, and they wonder why their compost isn't working. Well, you put your compost in the fridge. It's not getting the heat. Or it's all covered up and the water's not getting into it, and it's dry and it's not changing and it just looks like dry grass. Months later, you need more water. Or it's only changing in some parts but not others. You haven't got oxygen all the way through it, and that's where turning it becomes important. And you have the living life in it. Have you primed it with worms and microorganisms and other compost and living soil to make sure that that living bacterial microorganism change is in there to help make that soil? That's the basics of how to get your compost going. So why compost? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about this, and then we've got a couple of questions coming up. So spot check number one. Now I've moved off from that screen. I'd like one person to tell me all four things that we need to make compost successfully. What were those four things we just said? Who can name all four? Go.
Water, heat, microbes, and air.
Perfect.
Oda.
Kia got it. So that's how compost works, but why should we even consider composting? So simply put, compost enriches your soil, obviously. It brings life to it. It enhances life within it. It adds nutrients to the soil. It acts as a fertilizer and as a soil conditioner, which means it gets it ready, it primes it up, gets it full of all the things that the plants need to grow successfully and to be able to access nutrients and to process them and to even grow. Aside from this, a really key point is that in a time when we are taking and taking and taking and taking from Popatuanuku, and we're taking so many things and we're removing and extracting resources and making our stuff and taking, compost, it's kind of radical because it's one example where we're giving back, where we're putting back into the system that whatever we've taken, whatever we've made, and whatever we've taken from our natural world, composting is one way where we give those things back. We hand those nutrients back. Riru taonga mai hoki taonga atu. We receive treasures from you, hoki taonga atu, and we give them back. We put them back into the story, and we keep it moving. Composting is a reciprocal activity, meaning it benefits me, it benefits others, it benefits all those connected to the story. Composting is a regenerative action. So it's regenerating, it's growing back, it's building. It's not just taking from and depleting, it's giving. Composting is an example of circular economy, which is another word we talk about, which is that same concept of rirotanga mai hokitanga atu, that what we take, we give back, what we use goes back into the story. It's circular, and it works in cycles, and it passes the nutrients on through to the soil, through to the plants, through to our bodies, into the compost, back into the soil. It's circular, as opposed to being linear, which is what landfill is, where we take, make, use, and then dispose of in a way that does not give back. That would be landfill. These food scraps are resources, leftover resources that have been recovered and repurposed. We have other resource recovery centers for materials that we use. Well, composting is also a resource recovery center, in that we're recovering those resources and keeping them in the story. They were initially koha from our atua, from Tāne, from Papa, and now we're returning them to Papa to be regenerated, to create new hua, new products. We're giving them back so they can stay in that story. So those are some of the reasons, good reasons why composting is a good option for dealing with your food waste. But what do we get from it, the process? Well, heaps is the answer. You get the best fertilizer, the best nutrients for your soils. If you're into any kind of food production or gardening, there is nothing you can buy in a shop that would be as good as the living, abundant, rich compost that you would make from your own natural processes through composting. And if you don't have plants, and even if you're not a gardener, there are plenty of people who you could share this with in a community setting who'd be desperate and grateful for your compost that you make from your food waste. Ko te mahi Wairākau, he mahi tiaki, he mahi aroha, he mahi manaki, I tō tātou tupuna whaia ia papa tuanu. However, there's a shift in our thinking about compost as well, that composting is not just an example of waste minimization. It's not just a way to make things go away. It's not just, oh, we can compost that, that's great, don't have to put it in the rubbish, I can compost it instead. Compost isn't just waste minimization. It's not a way to get rid of our food waste, though it is. It's all about the creation of these healthy soils, of building our soils, and securing our own health. So I'm going to give a few more statements about what composting is. And then there's going to be a bit of a twist at the end of this. So compost is about creating healthy, nutrient-rich, life-giving, food-growing soil with mana, with mauri, to sustain us and all our whanaunga. Composting is looking after our soil, hiniahuane, papatuanuku, and by doing that, we're looking after us, ourselves. By composting our organic materials and our food waste, we are actively feeding, caring for, tending, restoring hiniahuane. Composting is soil sovereignty, being in control of the health of our own whenua. The health and capability of our soils to grow food, the ability to secure our own food supply, and be more in control of our own personal and collective health. Composting strengthens our connection to the whenua, to our own whenua. It creates a relationship of nutrients passing through us, and that the health of the soil is the health of us. The health of the plants and the kai is the health of us. Composting upholds the mana of hiniahuane. Composting builds resilient local Māori food systems, not relying on the shops, not buying something from someone else, from somewhere else, potentially far away, wrapped in plastic and shipped with, fossil fuels. building our own food systems localizes these solutions. Now, in direct contrast to everything I've just said, by putting our organic materials and our food waste in landfill, we're doing the exact opposite. So I'm going to read some of those statements once again. This time I'm going to change composting is, and I'm going to put landfill is, or landfill is not, just to strengthen that point. Landfill is not. So this is what happens if you put food in rubbish, rubbish goes to landfill. Landfill is not about creating healthy, nutrient-rich, life-giving food growing soil with mana. Landfill is not looking after our soil, and it's not looking after us. Landfill is not actively caring, tending, restoring Hinyahuani. Landfill is not soil sovereignty. It's not being in control of our own whenua. It's not in control of our own food security or our personal or collective health. Landfill is not strengthening our connection to the whenua. It's not having a relationship of those nutrients. Landfill does not uphold the mana of Hineahuane and compost, and landfill does not build local resilient food systems. So I hope it's starting to become a little bit clear about which system is one that makes more sense. Okay, so now we're going to look at, but now we're going to go back to, we've learned about what composting is. We've got that solidified in our heads. We understand that composting is a really good idea. Let's go back to the myth that we started from at the beginning when I said, hang on, food waste does not belong in landfill. It just doesn't. And so now we're going to explore a little bit more about what that actually means. But before we do that, I want to get from you a question. I've got, let me just stop sharing this for a second, and I'm going to start sharing this instead. The question is, I want a list, a great big long list of everything that goes into landfill. Now, I want you to think of, I have it as the 3 Ds, the dangerous stuff that goes into rubbish, the disgusting stuff that goes into rubbish, and even the deadly stuff that goes into rubbish. And now you can see in front of you a big blank screen, and this is Minty, and there should be a, and you see there's a code at the top for you to put in. So if you go to minty.com, so if you have a second device like a phone, even better, you can do it on your main screen. I'm sharing this screen, so all our answers are going to come up on this screen in a second. If you go to minty.com, you should see a number that you enter in, and then you're going to type in your answers. And as everybody collectively puts their answers up, they're all going to show up on the screen. There we go. You can enter as many times as you like. So give me everything. Think of everything. Dangerous, disgusting, deadly, batteries, good. Nappies, good. Timber, treated timber. Ammunition, good one. Oil, yeah. Commercial waste. Toxic waste. Appliances. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Paint. What about when you take your dog for a walk and you live in town? You have to pick that up. Where does that go? TVs, good one. Poo, ooh. Yeah. What about if you had tissues? Food, obviously. Polystyrene, good one. Cleaning supplies, yes. Bubble wrap, yep. Asbestos. Kitty litter, good. We got nappies in there yet? Have we thought of, oh, nappies, yeah, that's definitely there. Yep, what a good list. Tires, packaging, hope, wastewater sludge, yes. Curbside household medications, good one. Weed killer bottles, good one. Dead animals, yes. True fact. Thanks. Good. That's a really good list. Okay. So now just look at that list. we're still going. Pack bottles. What's the word that comes out of, what's the issue with batteries? What's coming out of batteries? What's leaking? Why is that an issue in landfill? Pop that word in there. Why is sludge?
Lithium.
Yeah, heavy metals. Yeah. Earbuds. Okay, excellent, good. That's a great list. You've taken it to the task. Perfect. Now, look at all those words. Now, consider this for a second. Imagine landfill, COVID tests, all that stuff. Look at all those words. It's all in there together. Now, imagine if I just had a great big vat, a great big pot, and I was mixing all of those things, all those words, everything you're looking at, and I'm mixing it all together, and the rainwater is pouring through it, and the food waste is rotting within it and adding liquid. And I've now mixed it all together into this great big pot of stuff that I'm calling rubbish soup. What do you think it would, what do you think it would look like? Well, there is a name for this. Now, just keep an eye on all those things. Have one last look at those words, because I'm going to take that off the screen again in a sec. Just cast your eyes over everything. Chemical waste, toxic, nappies, poos, batteries, polystyrene, plastic, pharmaceutical, medical, timber, ammunition, toxic waste, all those things. Now, imagine this. I've mixed them all together. Just changing my screen around for a second. I've mixed them all together and I've made this stuff called rubbish soup. Now there is a name for this and it's called, let me just get back here, and it's called leachate. That's the word for rubbish juice. This is a real thing. This is what landfill creates. It's the mixture of all of those things you just said, all put into a liquid, soupy, toxic, poisonous form. Now, that's interesting. You might have known about that, but here we're just looking at a picture of, well, I've put the word dump up here because everyone calls it the dump. Take it to the dump. And that's what we used to call it for a very long time because we thought it was a really good idea to just dig a big hole in the ground and dump our stuff in it. Now pause for a second. When it's raining like it is today at the moment, when the rain hits the soil, when the rain hits the ground, where does the water go? Where does the rain go? And that's actually an answer I hope somebody will answer for me. Where does water go when it hits the ground? Obvious question.
Into the soil.
Into the soil. Perfect. Exactly. So if we're dumping rubbish into a hole in the ground, and if rubbish is making leachate, poisonous, toxic soup, and it's in a hole in the ground, where would that liquid go? Just like the rainwater. Where does it go? Somebody say
Into
it.
our water table.
Into the soil, into the ground, into our water table, and that's what happens. So this is one of the main reasons why dumping is illegal. You're not allowed to dump rubbish. It's toxic, it's deadly, it's dangerous, it's full of poisons, and the liquid from it goes into our soil, goes into our Whai, goes into our water. You're not allowed to do it. Reason number one. So we have, therefore, this thing called landfill. We don't want leachate leaking into our soil, into our waterways, harming both, Papatuanuku and Tongaroa and ourselves. So landfill's been created as a system to store, go back to that first point, to store our waste. It's a storage facility for our waste, to keep the toxins from getting into the taio. Now, side note, landfill is also a colonial construct it's a colonial way of thinking that we can just throw away what we don't want, that we can just take, make, and biff and throw away. And that's not traditional thinking. That's not our traditional ways of dealing with our gifts we've been given. We give them back. We don't just biff them. So landfill's not even a way we would do things in the first place. However, if we are going to be throwing things away instead of recovering or reusing or repurposing or repairing or recycling or composting them, if we're going to landfill them, then we have to find somewhere safe to put them. Safe is an interesting word. It's not really safe. Somewhere managed to keep the waste, remembering that it is just a landfill. It's a storage facility, but there's always risk from landfill leaking and from polluting and from being reopened, for example, by extreme weather events, as we've seen in the news here. It's never guaranteed safe. We have to monitor them and watch them forever to make sure that that leachate doesn't come out. Here's what landfill looks like as we're making it. So when we're making a new one, there are layers and layers of liners and buffers and drainage systems designed to capture that toxic waste, that leachate, that poisonous stuff, to keep it from interacting with any part of our natural world. Yeah. And generations to come, our muckles will be looking after our stuff that we got rid of, that we didn't want, because we put it in that system, and it's going to be dangerous stuff in a dangerous system, and we're going to have to monitor it for a very long time. However, the second product, there's two things. So leachate is the first thing that landfill gives us. The second is this thing called methane gas, if you've heard about this. And it's released from our food, primarily from our food and our organic waste going into landfill, because here in landfill, food waste rots. It doesn't decompose, it doesn't break down, it's not becoming new soil, it rots. And when things rot, that's where methane gas comes from. It's the lack of oxygen in landfills that impedes the organic materials from biodegrading as they would do in a natural setting. So organic matter like paper, wood, food scraps are stuck in this kind of limbo state, releasing methane. Now, the bad news about methane, if we want to talk about climate change and global warming and the impacts on our environment, methane gas is many more times more powerful than carbon as far as how it absorbs heat. In fact, methane gas is more than 80 times, has more than 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide. Doesn't last as long in the environment as carbon does, but it has a more intense warming function at the beginning. Now, just a note on food waste. This Wānanga is about composting our food waste. We could have another entire Wānanga about just preventing food waste in the first place, because that in itself is a major issue. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas behind China and the US, meaning the size and the volume and the pile of food that we are wasting, perfectly good food that could have been eaten and could have been distributed and could have been used. That's another whole issue, not just what to do with it. Today, we're talking about what to do with the food waste, but there's another conversation to be had about preventing the food waste even in the first place. So here's what it looks like when it gets all packed in. You can see when it goes into landfill, they're packing it in, they're cramming it down, they're getting as much in there as they possibly can, because remember, it's a storage facility. So they're getting as much in there as they can. All right, so now we're going to go into a breakout room for a couple of things. I've got two quick questions. I've been talking a fair bit. I'd like to see what you have to say. So the first breakout room is going to be really quick. It's only going to be about 1 or 2 minutes. Here's the question. So a good time to be back on screen and off mute. You're going to be automatically zoomed into a little collective with a few other people, and you're going to, it's like a whiti kōrero, so you're going to discuss back and forth and share some of your ideas. Here's the question. We just learned about compost. We saw that it needed heat, it needed water, it needed oxygen or air, and it needed worms, noke, microorganisms, needed all those things to change food waste into new soil. Here's the first question for 1 minute. I just want you to think about, if I had an apple in that landfill, in that picture we're looking at right there, what will the heat be doing? What will ngā hihi o tamanui te rā be doing? Well, the heat be working its way through into that landfill, into that cram-packed plastic spot? Will the roimata o Ranginui, will the tears of Ranginui be doing their job in that picture, in that cram-packed plastic compressed place? Will the Noki Noki be doing their job? Will the Tahau Tawhirematia, will it be involved in that? One more point, keep in mind, when this landfill is full, because landfills fill up, it's going to be closed, it's going to be sealed, it's going to be capped shut. Keep that in mind. So in a moment, breakout rooms, and I simply want to discuss what will the heat be doing in that setting? What will the water be doing in that setting? Can the water get through? Can the water be working? Will the worms be doing their job? Will the oxygen be doing their job? Why or why not? That's your first question. Okay, Kapai, I think we're ready to go. Just waiting for us to get into a breakout room. So just one moment, please. There we go.
Oops, kia ora po. I don't have my mic wasn't working, so I changed my settings and it took me out of the breakout room.
Oh, that's fine. We're about to wrap up that first breakout room. That's just a quick first one. So don't worry, we're gonna have another one in a second.
Oh, choice, thank you. And
Yep.
I'm sorry, I've got to shoot off to a tangi shortly as well, but I can watch the recording later, eh?
You sure can. Yep, we'll be sending it out.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, kia ora. No, thank you for dropping in.
Cool. I will just switch back off. Thank you.
Oh, heck. Took off early.
I think everyone's coming back now.
Yeah.
It's like we're all back in. Kia ora no tātou. Okay, what did you say? So we're going to go into another breakout room in a second. This is just the processing of what we found out so far. So somebody tell me, first of all, about, so you're asked, the question was, you know, is heat, is water, is air, are the worms and microorganisms going to work the same in a landfill setting? Somebody tell me about heat. What did you talk about? Someone go.
I'm happy to go. From my experience of spending quite a bit of time in a landfill, as part of kind of doing some waste minimisation work, there isn't any heat or water or light inside a landfill for those you know, natural things to break down, because the landfill is covered over every day. It's often covered with a clay base. And so no water, no light or no air gets in there apart from what might happen during the day. So often something like an apple won't actually break down very far. It'll just maybe brown up around the sides.
Perfect, Annie. You've just busted our myth that we started the whole hui with. That's great. Good answer. Okay. I think that's all we need to hear there then. So here comes Patai Tuarua. Here's the second one. Now this time you're going to get mixed up again, some new people into a breakout room. And you've seen the 4 things that compost, food waste needs in a compost setting: the heat, the water, the oxygen, the microorganisms. You've seen how a landfill is created: lined, packed, sealed, contained. This time you're going to simply explain as if you were going home from this hui and you were taking what you were learning and you were explaining to one of your friends, and they say, oh, don't worry about food waste in landfill, it's fine. And you say, no, it isn't, because, and you're going to now have a practice explain to the people in the breakout room, explain what compost needs, explain how a landfill is made, and explain why food waste does not break down in that setting. Doesn't have to be as long as that, but you're practicing your statement, how you're going to explain to somebody of what the 2 processes are and why food, kind of what Annie just said, why that isn't going to happen. So this time explaining the journey of that apple core in the landfill, what is going to happen or what isn't going to happen. What will it produce in landfill? What could it have produced in compost? So my trusty assistant, we're ready for breakout rooms once again. And when we come back from this one, we're going to play a bit of a game. Hi, hold on. No, looks like we're back. What did you say? Someone give me a really great summary. Talked about in your breakout room. Let's have a couple.
I just said from our group that a friend says, oh, you know, it's okay to put food waste into landfill. It just rots, you know, just composts like normal. It's fine. And then you go, no, well, actually compost needs 4 things: heat, moisture, air, and microbes. In landfill, it is contained, covered, and mixed with a whole lot of other toxins. So you're unlikely to get any healthy microbes. You're unlikely to you'll get heat, but it'll be not the right sort of heat. And it will probably stay undecomposed for years, mummified pretty much. And that in itself takes up space and just doesn't, like a compost would, go down and decompose. So that's probably one of the worst things you could put into landfill.
Kia ora, Karen, wonderful, great answer. And yes, it actually, that's a really good point. It actually makes it worse. Like if landfill was just plastic and other things, hapai, but because we're mixing that food waste, which creates that leachate, it's the food waste that's creating the problem. It's making the problem worse by putting organics into a landfill setting. Good. Anil, how about one more? Summary.
We had
Go ahead.
for it.
we had a beautiful whakaaro from John in our rōpū around the fact that we're just missing out on a really vital nutrient by not adding it into our soil, not making it into compost. So I thought that was just a really simple way of explaining that. Yeah, you put it into landfill, you're not adding anything back to Papatūānuku.
Yeah, and missing out. I love that point there, missing out. We've missed a chance of having something great. Right.
Plus, you know, we have an extremely hungry population. Like, everyone needs more kai. That's what that stuff should be doing, eh? Circulating back into people.
Yeah, food waste actually feeds us. Food waste makes soil, that makes food, that feeds us. Simple. Someone else was about to say something.
I just wanted to ask, I think, about a response that wouldn't come across as shaming anyone, and how we have these conversations that kind of encourage people to take an approach that is like positive and not difficult and not something that they need to, you know, it's quite, I asked quite a few questions in the chat because I just don't know the answers, and I feel embarrassed that I don't know the answers. I feel like I should already know, and I'm really curious as to how Mahi in this space speak in a way that really accentuates our atuatanga, as you mentioned, in a way that makes us go, yeah, I want to get in on that, and that's cool, and doesn't make me feel stink.
Yeah, great comment there, Nadine. Yes, 100% I'll talk about that. And I think that's where focusing on all those positive statements. We were saying before what composting is. You know, composting is soil sovereignty. Composting is health. Composting is relationship with our whenua. Composting is engaging our atuatanga. Composting is looking after us. And so that's the excitement, like that's what we should be doing. There's the good news story. There's the solution. There's the problem. We're acknowledging the problem. Landfill's the problem, but that's not the way to go. You don't motivate people to do something by showing them terrible pictures of landfill and saying, look how awful this is. Show them beautiful pictures of marakai and gardens and vibrant communities and cooperative, collaborative systems of collecting food waste, like I'm doing with the high school. The high school's food waste goes into a community compost hub, which goes into the community gardens, which feeds the neighborhood. You know, good news stories, positive examples of what our food can do rather than what not to do. So yeah, I would totally agree with you. It's good to be aware of that downside stuff, but let's focus on the solutions because it's actually really quite easy. It's just putting our food in a bin, in a food bin. That's all we have to do. It's that 5-second choice. Just don't put it in the rubbish bin, put it in the food waste bin. And it's going to do all those things that we said, whether we're out there digging the garden or not. the food waste in the right place is going to do all those things. Okay, let's have a bit of any more patai before I move on? Any more comments? I'm ready to go to the next bit. Those are really, really valuable summaries, though. It's nice to hear how you're processing.
I got one,
Cardo.
brother. I got one. So just quickly, so we can use that Auckland flooding, so we talk about methane and how methane is going up in the atmosphere. Like global warming is a real thing. And, but like what you were saying, you got to focus on the positive, which is getting everybody composting so that we're not putting our rubbish in landfill anymore.
Yeah, normalizing soil building initiatives, normalizing our food waste is a resource, normalizing feeding anything, chickens, pigs, worms, soil, feeding nature, putting food where it feeds something, not putting food where it becomes ngā mate o te ruapara, where it becomes dead leachate. Landfill just isn't the option. All those other things are. Okay, share screen. This time, this is a visual. So I don't need to hear you, but I need to see you. And I'm going to read a bunch of statements. Oh, just before I do, I just said, let's not look at pictures of landfill. Now I'm showing you pictures of landfill. I think we'll just quickly move on. Ngā mate o te ruapara. So it's the mate of ruapara. It's a waste of our land. It's a waste of our resources. It's a waste of space. But let's not focus on that. I guess the point is there when people say, throw it away. I say, okay, away. Here's what away looks like. This is away. Away has a name. Away is a place. There is no magical away, meaning it's nowhere. It is somebody's whenua. It's somebody's place. Putting it in the rubbish bin puts it there. So rubbish is not obviously the answer. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about compost or landfill. Okay. And actually, I'm going to just move this down here because I want to see all of you. If you think the answer, so this is a visual, if you think the answer to my question is compost, you're going to give me a big thumbs up, because that's an easy answer to give. Thumbs up, also reinforcing that this is the mahi that we want to be engaging in, thumbs up. If you think the answer to my question is landfill, you're going to give it the big thumbs down. We don't want to be doing that. That is not the best option. So a bunch of statements and everyone's doing it and you're all processing and listening to the question and you're going to show me compost or landfill. All right, well, let's start with the negative. Whoops. Which one is toxic, deadly, dangerous to Papa Tuanuku and all her descendants? Is that a thumbs up for compost or a thumbs down for landfill? Thumbs down for landfill. Which one is beneficial, restorative, regenerative, life-building for Papa Tuanuku and her descendants? Compost. Thing. In which system does our food waste pass on their nutrients? Right, compost. In which system does our food waste create poison? Pollution, yeah, landfill. Which one takes the longest time to process things, to make things go away? Your mokos will still be looking after the stuff you got rid of if you put it here. Yeah, kapai, landfill. Which one do you have to pay to put it there because people need to continually look after it for years and years and decades and centuries? Yes, landfill. In which system do we need to prevent the contents from getting into nature? They must not engage with the taiao, with our natural world, landfill. In which system do we want the contents to get into nature? We want it to, yeah, compost. We want it to be part of the natural system. Good. In which system strengthens our connection to the whenua? Compost. Right. In which system are we practicing engaging with our atuatanga? Compost. Which system upholds the mana of Hineahuone? Compost. Which one builds resilient local Māori food systems? Hey, compost. And all right, most important question of all, which one makes the most sense? Hope you're all pointing up for compost. Yeah, it just makes sense. It just makes sense. Like what we were saying before, it doesn't make sense to put things into landfill. It makes sense to compost. Okay, last couple of questions. We're nearly finished the presentation part of this, and then we're going to go and actually look at an example of a compost in a second. But first of all, here's my first part. There's a whole bunch of things we've said today that happens to food waste. I've got a whole list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got about 10 statements of what food waste does when it's put into compost. So I'd like a list of a whole bunch of things. Tell me something that we achieve or that we get or that it produces or what happens. Any of the positive things we've said about compost so far. So this is a moment of unmute once again. Somebody tell me one thing that we achieve by putting food waste in compost. Go.
Make soil.
Make soil. Good. What else?
Feed birds.
Say that again, Nick.
Feed birds.
Oh, feed birds. Okay. What else does it do?
Yeah.
Regenerative.
Good. Regenerates. Yes. Good word. What else does it do?
Soil and food sovereignty.
Good. Food
Yes.
sovereignty. Yes. What else?
Natural cycle.
Good. I love it. Thank you, Honne. Anything else?
Waste.
What about the waste, Holly?
Feed soil microorganisms.
Feeds the soil, feeds microorganisms. Yes.
Reciprocal.
Reciprocal. Good.
Natural.
Good. It's natural. What about the nutrients?
Creates nutrient-rich soil.
Yep. So it's passing those nutrients on. Good.
Kai anō.
Riro kai atu, hoki kai mai.
Love it. Yep. Exactly. Giving it all back. Perfect. And it aligns with the values of our atua. And we're taking care of our whakapapa. When we whakapapa to these places, talk about them, we want to say we're looking after them. Well, hey, putting your food waste into a composting system is taking care of our very own whakapapa. Easy as that.
Wairākau.
Tikanga, indeed. Yep. We know what happens to food waste when it goes into landfill. We've talked about that. It creates leachate, it creates methane gas, and it's harmful. So here is the last question before we go into our reflection, our pu mahara. Now, there are some big differences between these two systems. And I'll give you an example of what I'm thinking about. Oops. Last part is, what are the big differences between these two systems? Now, again, there's quite a list here. We're going to go into a breakout room for this. Let me give you an example. This is the kind of answer I'm looking for. For example, one system benefits papatuanuku, compost. The other system harms papatuanuku, landfill. So that's a difference. I want you to come up with a whole bunch of these differences. How is one different? One is natural, one is not natural. One is this, the other one is that. See how many you can get. I've got, again, a list of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M. I've got about 15 or 20. So keep thinking. One system does this, one system achieves this, one system produces this, whereas the other one is the opposite. It does that. Hopefully you understand that question. Coming up with some differences in your breakout room, you're going to get at least 3 differences between the two systems like that. Okay, I'll stop sharing and you'll find yourself into, this is our final breakout room. And then we'll come back for a bit of reflection on what we've learned. And then we'll be out to look at our first example of a compost system. So see you in a few moments. Off you go. Welcome back. Looks like we're all dropping back in. Okay, what were some of the differences you came up with? Oh, still coming back.
One's circular, one's linear.
Good answer. Ka pai.
One's mana enhancing and one's not.
Love it.
One's corporate and the other is kind of individual.
Yep.
One enriches the mauri of the whenua, the other diminishes the mauri of papa and rangi in their tamariki.
Good one.
I love that one.
One builds resilience between people and communities, and the other actively requires energy inputs and loss of nutrients. You know, you get, so it's quite opposite.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon.
I'm going to play slight devil's advocate and say one's easy and the other one is often perceived as being hard.
Good point.
And that's where the challenge comes in.
Yeah.
One like saves you money by not having to buy fertilizers and stuff, and the other one actively costs you money.
Yep.
In the example of extreme, one costs you money and one can make you money.
Yeah. True. Thanks, Sonia.
One protects our whakapapa and the other doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
One relates with life and the other is hidden, as best you can.
Ooh, good one, honey.
A cool one of our group came up with is one is poison and one is almost medicine.
Love it.
God boy.
One can bring communities together and the other can pollute and destroy them.
Yeah, pull them apart even. Yep.
One is oranga and the other is mawiwitanga.
Kia ora, Brenda. Last one.
One is rogo marairo, the other is aitaga apiro.
Right, thanks, Kane.
Oh, one last one. I don't know if it's going to be mentioned. One takes a short amount of time, one's forever.
Yeah, in the scheme of things, you're right. Ka pai. Kia ora, Sonia. All right, really good answers. You know, and part of this compost 101 is that we know that landfill is bad and that composting is great, but we haven't actually stopped to really think about some of those statements, like what we've just shared, like how obvious that choice is. We get quite used to the choice of just having a couple of bins, but you know, the distance between the 2 points is enormous. Well, kia ora tātou, we're coming up to the end and it's 11:13. I've got to show you some compost. So I think it is going to be time to do that. Let me just do a little quick change around. Of course, it's raining here at the moment, but don't worry, I'm prepared. I've got it all set up so that we can still have a look. Coming up next in our next online event, we'll have Sam, who is in the room, has been in the room today. He'll be presenting Ngā Momo Punaha Wairākau, the different styles of composting, the different types of composting. And there are a few you can have based on your context and where you are and where you live and how many people and what your options are. There isn't a one-stop shop when it comes to composting, as Annie said before. It could be it's perceived as being a little bit tricky. So as part of these wānanga, we also wanted to just show you a couple of different kinds of compost as we go, so that you can become familiar with them. And I can see lots of questions coming up in our chat, which is really, really good, which is what we want to see. So I'm going to show you today worm farm, just really quickly before we have time for a little bit of questions and before we finish off at 11:30. So I've now got myself, just move myself outside. We're going to transition. Hands up in your window screen if you have a worm farm. Hands up in your screen if you know somebody who's got a worm farm or you've ever seen it or been done before. Fantastic. So I'm going to show you my worm farm out here. I've got myself logged in twice. Let's see if this is going to work. And see if this is working now. All right. But here is my worm.
Paul, I'm struggling to hear you, mate.
I think your finger might be on the mic.
Sorry, I'll stand over here. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Now.
We can't see your phone, brother.
Okay, hang on. Crystal was going to pin that for me so that would be the one you'd be seeing. Can you not see?
Oh,
okay,
can't see it.
Not working. You can't. Where's it gone? Okay.
Yeah, I can see you.
Wait, can see you now.
Okay, how's that?
That's awesome, bro.
Now you're looking good. Okay, so here's my worm farm. And the benefits of these, they're good for a home system, but they do not take all kinds of food. They only take some kinds of food. So they're pretty much only for plants. So plant, fruit and vegetable. They're not going to take your bread. They're not going to take your meat. Quite restrictive in that way. So people would, so I'm just trying to get a glove on with one hand. That's not going to work. Yeah, this is a bit tricky. So they only take certain kinds of waste. So people would say, well, why would you bother doing that if it only takes fruit and veggies? Well, reason number one, if you're a gardener, that tray of juice down the bottom is your black gold, is your magic garden juice. It is the best stuff you're ever going to get to put on your garden and make your plants grow. I'm just going to, let me just put my, I'm just going to put the phone down for a second. Just got to get a glove on. Can you hear me if I'm over here? I'm trying to see if you can hear me.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, that looks good, Paul.
We can't hear you though, Paul.
Okay, so apologies for that. We did a trial to try to get the mic working. It's raining and it's on my deck. It's a little bit hard at the moment. But here's your worm farm, plant-based matter. Now that juice out the bottom, I'm just going to show you. I'll stop talking, but I'm going to show you what I do with it. And this is how it becomes food for your garden.
So
this is a different kind of leachate. This is the good kind of leachate. This is the liquid that comes out of the noke and all the work being done to decompose the food waste in here. And look at the soil.
Dark.
Look at the color of the soil. Yeah, dark, black, full of nutrients. Your food. Look at all the life in it. You can see just everything inside it. But mix a little bit of this because that is so strong. You would not want to put that straight on your garden. So I've just got some rainwater over there, and you have to dilute it. And depending how strong it is, you might even dilute it up to 10 times because it's such a potent, strong. And then you can see how strong that is. You might dilute it 10 to 1. This is what I put on my plants. Oh, even then, it's still too strong. You want it diluted at the same kind of strength as maybe a tea or a coffee. See how that one little teeny tiny bit of worm juice has still, I mean, look, I've got half a bucket here so far. I'm still going. And I didn't even hardly put, wasn't even a quarter of a cup of worm juice in there. And this is the food. I mean, there's nothing you can buy in the shop for that. And it will make your food grow. So of course, the last step, I'm going to walk away from the computer. To do that. That's the final step. Okay, I'm gonna unpin my camera now and come back to me. Right.
That's awesome, Paul. That's amazing, brother.
That was a very dodgy attempt at trying to show you my worm farm. I was hoping it was going to go a bit smoother than that. But hopefully you got a sense of, I mean, that's a hungry bin, so it's on wheels. I wheeled it up to my back deck. Therefore, it's good for smaller settings. It's good for households. It's good for an office space, a kohanga or a kindi. Wouldn't work on a large scale because you could see the size of that worm farm was pretty much the scale like that would be appropriate for a home setting like that. Now, that's only one method of composting. We're going to show you 5 more next online event. That suits some people, doesn't suit everybody, but I love it because as you saw, I've got lots of pots out there and it feeds all my plants. All right, let's get to the partai. There's a bunch of questions coming through. We want to finish on time by 11:30. Back in again, back in from outside. Hopefully you're feeling inspired. If you're engaged with parakore, this is where your relationship with your kaiarahi comes in, because if you have all these questions and you're wondering what to do, then we've got lots of time and lots of desire to help you understand compost. All right, let's have a look. A couple of questions. I'm going to look at the ones in the chat. Our urban compost is very wet. What dry matter could we add to it? Now,
19,
our third one, this is the first. Next week is the different types of compost. And the third online event is all about nitrogen and carbon, introducing nitrogen and carbon into your compost and how they are essential components. So that's what this first question is actually asking about, saying that your compost is very wet. What dry matter could we add? So carbon is your dry stuff, brown, dry, dead. Now, in a natural setting, that could be things like hay or straw or old autumn leaves or things like that. But if you're in an urban setting, you may not have access to bales of hay or straw, or I'm just moving the cat off the table. Oh. My computer cords. So in an urban setting, you might have to think of some other dry materials, and that could be things like your brown paper bags, your unbleached paper, your egg cartons. It's not a living carbon in that it's not alive with microbial life in it, but it would be dry enough to help balance that moisture in your compost and soak up some of the moisture. And adding cardboard and carbon actually helps balance the pH in your soil as well. That's patai tuatahi. Okay, here's the next one. Yeah, okay, good point from Nick saying food waste does break down just anaerobically, yeah, in compost. Yeah, that's right. So it's, whether breaking down is the correct term, it rots, it decomposes in an anaerobic way, which means without oxygen, which is what creates the methane. Yeah. Oh, collects and uses the methane. Yeah. How best to respond to that? So if you're collecting the methane and saying, don't worry about that, we're going to collect the methane and generate power from it, well, I suppose you found a purpose for it, but it still requires and presupposes that whole linear wasteful system. It's not a regenerative system. It's not a reciprocal system. It's not rebuilding soils. So yeah, okay, you've captured the byproduct of a linear system and made one more thing out of it, but it's not creating that food cycle and it's not creating that relationship with the whenua.
Thank you for your answer, Paul. Sorry, just to jump in, I was going to say, like, convincing councils of that is not always so easy because they like that kind of linear approach because it's easy to manage.
Yeah.
And that's our challenge in Southland is we've got this class 1 landfill, everyone loves it, and so they're happy to chuck it in because it collects the methane. But you know, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's the same as the incineration arguments, the waste into energy, burning our rubbish. So let's just keep consuming, let's just keep having lots of rubbish, let's not reduce in any way because we can burn it and we can make energy from it. So no problem. Yeah, it's the same argument. But in general, we're waking up to the fact that we need to create circular, regenerative, sustainable systems. And so that's a linear one that still presupposes that whole story before it. Yeah, kapai. It's not an easy argument to win. Love the open compost setup. Would love to hear different ways. People manage rats and mice. Yep. Okay. So part of the next presentation with Sam will be 5 different kinds of composting systems, and some of them that are open, they're not appropriate for food waste because you are going to attract those vermin. And there are other systems we're going to showcase that are fully closed and are vermin proof and can reach higher temperatures and process all kinds of food waste. So there are different setups, but in your home, yeah, the home challenge would be you need something that is enclosed, especially if you're trying to compost meat or dairy or things that would attract them in the first place. That's where we can talk about bokashi. That's where we can talk about hot compost systems. There are ways, there are just other ways to do that. Nick says, re the worm farm, the liquid isn't always beneficial. Oh, that's interesting. Well, it can be not beneficial if you can actually burn. I'm not sure if this is what you're meaning, but you can actually burn your plants. It can be too intense. And if it's not diluted enough, it can certainly, yeah, it can either make your food bolt and grow out to seed before fruiting. So you have to know how to use it like any other sort of fertilizer. And I've killed plants by putting it on too strong. So
sorry to jump in.
Yep. Clarify that.
Just to clarify that point, if you when food is biodegrading in your worm farm, it's not always necessarily breaking down right, and so the liquid can collect quite a lot of dangerous chemicals from the breakdown of the food waste. So the liquid that comes out isn't always so pure and just nutrient rich. It can also have harmful aldehydes and stuff like that in it as well. So somebody mentioned before that it can be better to take the worm castings and then dissolve those in water and use that rather than the actual liquid that drains out. But that might be just going a bit technical on the matter.
No, that's a really good point. And it is a true point. There is a difference between what they call worm tea, and leachate. So what I was showing you outside was leachate, which is the drain process, is what you're saying. Worm tea is like a gardener or a composter would take what you're saying and make a tea, like a liquid out of drawing out from the vermicasting. So I have understood that difference as well. And it does sound a little bit complicated and technical to know when it hits that point, when it becomes leachate that's non-beneficial. Yes, I don't have a lot more to say to that at the moment, but I know that is a thing.
I was just going to say, Nick, we've been doing worm farms for a really long time in our region, and really have we seen anything like that with most people's worm farms or school worm farms? I think it would depend kind of what you were putting in them, but yeah, my colleague's a horticulturalist who kind of runs part of that program, and we really haven't had a lot of issues in that space.
Oh,
Awesome.
right.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you for that comment. My compost often, Deep South Challenge, my compost often smells foul. How do I know what it needs more of? And also the next point also says, I've also found some maggots digging around in there. What did I do wrong? And the next question is, but what not to put in the compost, bones, meat, etc. So all those questions kind of go together. If your compost smells foul, I'd be asking, what are you putting in it? It shouldn't smell foul. Your compost should have that wonderful, sweet kind of smell, like, you know, autumn leaves decaying on the forest floor, that kind of earthy plant smell. That's how your compost should smell. If it's got maggots, you've had meat in there. If it smells, it means it's rotting. It could mean that you're heaping up too much food and it's just rotting. It's not mixing, it's not layered, it's not with carbon and nitrogen. It could just be a pile that's rotting. If you open your compost and there's fruit flies coming out and it smells push, then I would suggest it's too acidic. You've got a pileup of rotting food. You haven't, and we have one about this in particular, about how to manage your worm farm, about how to manage your compost, about how to layer your nitrogen and carbon, how much to put in. Just about the only exception, so a hot composting system, which is fully enclosed, or a bokashi system, which is actually an anaerobic system, both of those systems will take meat and dairy and bones, but it's a different way of managing them. So a worm farm or an open compost isn't, and it's using all those things we started learning about. It needs the oxygen, needs the water and the air, so they're more open systems. You typically wouldn't be putting meat or dairy or bones or fish or bread or cooked food or rice or any of those things in that kind of composting system. That's where I'd point you to bokashi or hot composting. 11:30. Well, there's heaps of questions and I can see, there's only a few more, but we need to wrap up because this is the end of our advertised time and it's 11:30 and we've had an amazing hui. Let me just finish off with maybe one question back on the Pumahara. Let's just finish off with a reflection. I'd love to just hear from a couple of people. Any of those three questions, really. Either what surprised you in today's presentation, or how has it changed what you think about food waste, or even what are your next steps? So from today's presentation, who would have something to say to that, would like to offer us any reflection on what we've learned and talked about? Somebody at least.
I really liked the statement that you made that a landfill or a dump isn't a traditional way of looking after our resources. And I think that's a really good place to often start and go, well, what were the traditional ways that we used and how can we look at getting back to some of those practices and who might be able to help us?
Kia ora. Thank you, Annie.
I like the use of words like mana enhancing and things like that. People just think of compost as something, you know, you just put on your garden to feed your plants, but there's a bigger perspective you can take on the whole thing.
Kia ora. Thanks, Sonia. Maybe one more.
Yes, Paul.
Right from the, go.
Yes, Paul. what I'm going to, my next step, I'm looking at my next step, because what I've heard today, I'm glad, you know, that it's out there. It's out there. The information, what I'm looking at is my next step to really enforce what I started a couple of years ago at our school, that, you know, with our tamariki knowing how to take their rapihi i Tikanga, take their rubbish back home, and how we're making our worm farms, etc. It's just telling me that we're on the right track, Paul. This wānanga is telling me we're on the right track.
Hi. My absolute pleasure. Wonderful. Well, we better wrap up because that is our time. I'm really, really happy to have had all of you in the room today. I've loved your discussions. I've loved your comments. We'll send a recording via email because you've registered by the end of the week. And we'll find a way to answer off some of those final questions as well. So, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa mo o koutou whakaro, o koutou kōrero, he kōrero tino whakahirahira tēnei mo te mahi tiaki te taiao, manaki o papa tuanuku. Nō reira ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. E ngā manuhiri, I matakitaki ana, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. Kia kaha tātou ki te whai, I te parakori. Kia matara, kia manawa nui, kia tau, te rangimari kei runga I a koutou. Nai nei, ka whakakapi a hau, I tēnei hui me te karakia. Reira, a minoi tātou. Kia tau te manaakitanga ki runga I tēnā o tātou. Kia piki te ora, kia piki te maramatanga. Kia hoki pai atu, kia hoki pai mai, tūturu whakamauba, kia tīna. Haungia, huie.
Hi.
Hi, kia ora tātou. Go off and have a great day. Go save the world through composting. Hooray!